Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Performance Assurance webinar. My name is Amy and I work on the communications team for the Retcode Manager, and I will be facilitating today's session. I have joining me today colleagues from across the Retcode Manager. So just to take you through a few bits of housekeeping for today. This session is being recorded and the recording and slides for the event will be made available on the Rec portal next week. If everyone could please keep their microphones and cameras off unless speaking, it would be greatly appreciated. To take your questions today, we are using Slido, and you can access this via the QR code that should be on the screen now. If you have a smartphone, you can scan this QR code to access Slido using your camera app, or you can type the number on screen into slido.com on your web browser. Alternatively, if you're using the desktop app for Teams, you'll be able to see an S at the top of the call where you can click and access Slido that way. We will have a designated Q&A section at the end, but please feel free to submit your questions via Slido as they come to you throughout the session. I have also set up a feedback survey on Slido, so please feel free to let us know how you found today's session or give us any suggestions for how we run future events. So I will now pass over to Anton to take us through the agenda for today. Thank you, Anton.
Hello. So my name is Anton Moden. I hope a few of you know me, and my role in the Retcode Manager is to lead the performance assurance service. We've put together an agenda today based on things we thought might be useful to you, and based on previous things we've said we would do in the performance operating plan, performance assurance operating plan. So the first thing we'll be covering is showing you at a kind of market level some of the things that we've seen, and sharing the activities that we've undertaken and some of the rationale behind them. Thinking about the performance assurance dashboards, I'm sure you've all been using those, but this is a bit of a recap on how to access it, just in case anybody was not quite sure of that yet. Some information on file validation, some new functionality. We thought it's really important to explain that, and some looking forward, some of the things that might be relevant that we're trying to change, and just some clarity on future deadlines. And then I think the thing that we wanted to cover at the end that perhaps is the most important part of all is an open forum. So we haven't got lots of content in that, but it is an opportunity to engage with us, to ask us questions, to talk about areas that you might be struggling that might be within our area, and to make this a bit less of a broadcast and a bit more of a two-way interaction. Of course there will be time for questions as they go if they are relevant, but I think the most important thing would be the open two-way dialogue. So just to start us off, I wanted to hand over to V, who's a really important member of our team who focuses on party assurance, to kick us off.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anton. Amy, can I ask you to move to the first slide, please? The next one, please. Thank you very much. So to kick us off, I want to talk to you and sort of give you a recap of our party assurance process. So we use a combination of risk monitoring activities along with some specific techniques such as maintenance of qualification assessments to cover party performance across the market. Now, this process that I talk about contains a six-fold approach that you can see on the screen right now. The first step of which is a risk identification. So we update our risk register, which is published on the Rec portal, and the risk drivers related as a part of this first step. We then, using that risk register and the performance assurance reporting catalog, we receive data items which our analytics team very kindly process, and they prepare the dashboards on a monthly basis, which we then use for our risk evaluation process, which is the next step. there we review party performance across the market. All risk drivers that we review have that there's a PAB sets a threshold for them, and then we review performance against those thresholds. More information on all of this can also be found on the REC portal. Under the code documents, there are user guides for performance assurance techniques and the performance assurance methodology that you can look at. Moving on from that, the next step in our process is the assurance techniques. So we have a variety of assurance techniques we apply depending on the insights that we are seeing. And from these techniques, the output of the assurance activity is then reviewed, and we hope to bring about improvement in performance across industry through this process. So that is our process. It helps us see things that are working well and also where challenges lie and interventions can be focused. So thank you very much. If we can move to the next slide, please, Amy. Thank you. So over here, based on the data we've been seeing for the past few months, we've got you a snapshot of the switching trends since CSS go live. So as you can see, the overall number of switches peaked in September after CSS go live. We believe this is due to the industry catching up from the go live process, but we've seen these numbers settle down again to historic figures in October. That said, we have seen the number of objections reduce. We've also seen the number of events of annulled switches, withdrawn switches, and erroneous switches all reduce over the period between August and October. Can we please see the next slide? And then some other improvements that we've seen in the industry. Sorry, I think one of the numbers is not very clear, but we've seen the proportion of change of supply events for switch meter reads where they're disputed or they're missing. We've seen that reduce as a proportion of the total number of switches. So this was 6% in September, and we saw this drop down to 1% in October, which is the latest set of data we had reviewed. And then similarly, for the number of late resolved erroneous switches, we saw close to 9,000 instances in September, which reduced to just over 1,800 in October. That said, there are some areas that continue to be an area of focus for the REC performance assurance team. One of those is the debt assignment protocol, and we're working jointly with other code managers to forward the REC change proposal 37. And then another area for improvement that we recognize is our assurance over mem flows, especially with the focus of timeliness of sending MTDs and also on fault resolution. Thank you. If you can move to the next slide, please. So that said, that's what we've seen in the market over the last quarter or so. So just to tell you a bit more about our assurance activities, we currently review 14 risk drivers as a part of this risk monitoring activity. 8 of these drivers have either been updated or are new drivers introduced since CSS go live. PAB are in the process of setting thresholds for these new or updated risk drivers, and these will be set in February. And then just as an overview, we've seen the number of parties breaching thresholds reduce from 28 in September to 23 in October, whilst the overall compliance score across the industry has remained stable over the last quarter. Now, the pie chart on the screen shows the types of the split of the performance assurance techniques we've applied since October. Now, over here, you can see about 50% of these comprise of either requests for clarification or requests for information. So just to clarify for all of you all, when we think when we see something might not be quite right, but it may be a new risk driver that we're monitoring, and we want to understand the situation in a bit more detail, we first issue a request for clarification where we're reaching out to the party to understand the data that we're looking at and some potential root causes which may or may not be within the control of the organization. When we see ongoing non-compliance, we do issue requests for information, and especially this would be in cases where we do have existing thresholds as well. There are other techniques as well that you see we may apply in addition to or on top of these RFCs and RFIs, as we call them. These could be self-assessments or direct engagement with parties or industry-wide surveys and even remediation actions. And then when we see that there is a need for escalation on some of the matters, we then move on with management assertions. So you can see about 38% of the PATs applied since October comprise of these management assertions, where we ask a senior exec team member of the organization to acknowledge the issue that we're noticing and confirm the actions the organization's taking to improve their compliance on that matter. So that is on party assurance side. I think the next section I will hand back over to Anton, who will take you through the activity we conduct with service providers. Over to you, Anton.
So obviously we've been talking about our monitoring of parties. We don't just look at parties, so our remit covers the rec service providers as well. And I guess the goal for us all is the whole ecosystem works, you know, the parties, the service providers, all of that. So we do a couple of things that I've just put on screen in our role. We receive regular reports on performance based on metrics that are set out in the code, in the service definitions for specific service providers. You know, the targets for EES are naturally different to ERDS or CSS, but they're measured on the obligations in the code. We conduct assurance to assess the accuracy of that reporting, because self-provided reports clearly are a sensible way of doing things, but that needs to be accurate information. And we take specific interventions based on their performance. Now, in the same way that we just talked about the market at an aggregated level, I'm happy to talk about this at an aggregated level and some of the bigger picture specific interventions, but we wouldn't disclose what we're doing with an individual organisation based on their performance. That's not really the appropriate way for us to behave, other than, you know, the stuff that we disclose at PAB or normally. So that's the high level scope of what we're doing, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we've seen. So there is a graphic to help me on the next slide. So since CSS go live, and July was a bit of a weird month, so we're not thinking about that right now. We have seen some areas where service provision isn't where we would expect it to be at the long run average. So if in 10 years time things are at the same kind of level of maturity as day one, you know that isn't right. So we do expect service providers to improve over time. However, it has taught us a little bit about our metrics and a little bit about what's going on in the provision of these services. So there's a couple of obvious things to say, and you may be aware of this. There are some areas where service provider performance does need to improve, and I guess the thing that this shows you, even though it is at a high level, is that there is governance over these organisations, and that even on a quite like a month-to-month basis, there's an opportunity for these things to emerge and be looked at. The second thing to say, though, is at times we have found that the service levels have sometimes been cross-correlated, and what I mean by that is something like gate closure, an issue with gate closure, can actually be a problem with one organisation, but actually show up in lots and lots of organisations, and it might also show up in several performance indicators. So where there are in that lower end of the spectrum some organisations who have regular challenges, actually they probably aren't lots and lots of challenges. There are a small number of challenges that they can work on an action plan to improve. Now, many of you will know that there are appropriate forums for this, one of which is the Switching Operator Issues Forum, which is a mechanism for these kinds of problems to be articulated, discussed, and have appropriate engagement with those that, those involved or those affected. And we attend that to understand if problems are being pushed forward, appropriate consultation is taking place. And I think the biggest, most important message I wanted to give today is that the key areas of challenge are things that are being accurately described to parties and stakeholders through that process at the moment, and that the areas where they're causing some of the lower end performance, there are action plans in place and we are involved in those, and there are performance assurance techniques in place to drive them up. Now, the reality of the world is this chart will never get to a tiny little dot at 100%, which is clearly where we want it to be, right? That probably is impractical, but the intention is, through the hard work of service providers, we do definitely recognise that's clearly the driver, and the oversight of the Performance Assurance Board, that the intention is to drive up the performance in this area. I guess the key reason for this is that parties get the service that they are effectively paying for, and that customers effectively get the service that they're paying for. It is for both of those organisations. So that's really what I wanted to cover. I'm not sure if there was a question. I did see a little chat bubble come across. Let me just check it out.
We have had a question come in through Slido. So relating to the management assertion requiring board sign-off, is this overkill at this stage, and should it be as defined management assertion is adequate?
So I do think there is a definition of what a management assertion is expected to be, and I think that is defined in our guidance. So certainly we realise parties are very varied. I don't think this relates to service providers, by the way. I think they are very varied, and some of them might not have directors, for example. They might not be legal companies. So I think the wording in our guidance is that it's an appropriate representative equivalent to that. Now, I guess the thing that we're saying is that this needs to be this is a really, really important assertion made by an organisation of their compliance with the Retail Energy Code. It should be done by someone appropriately senior. We can't just write who they are because of the diversity of this, but it probably isn't the contract manager. So I think maybe, Steve, we could engage with you separately to think about the appropriateness of the individual who might be making that approval, that sign off. But I guess it is a pretty serious thing that does need someone with appropriate authorization to do it.
I guess, Anton, I mean, we've got practical experience of this, because you're asking us to sign it. Yeah, it's nothing to do with us. It was actually human error on the side of the contract of the code manager that led us down the route of actually ending up at this. So taking aside the fact we shouldn't even have to sign this, but we're having to do it anyway because we're having to follow a process that's not allowing us to have flexibility. The fact is, it's not saying that we can sign it off at a lower level, saying that you're requiring the board to approve it. And we're not a company of two people. We're a multinational company with with formal boards, and that requires written resolution. It requires submission in advance of a scheduled board meeting. That's not meeting timelines that you're looking for, because our timelines are what you'd normally take to a company board as being important issues. So I think what we're asking is, it's asking for a management assertion, it's asking for a board assertion, and therefore by definition, why are you insisting that our board has to sign it off, with all of the practical problems that arise from that request? Albeit as a secondary issue, we shouldn't even have to be signing this thing in the first place, but even if we did, we're experiencing the practical realities of actually following this process. I completely agree it should be a senior responsible person in the organisation, but I think we need to get our escalation proportionate.
No, I totally agree with the principles you've talked to, and it seems like we need to speak to you in detail about your individual case. Like I'd like clearly this doesn't need to be like the global ultimate beneficiary owner, the ultimate top co, and we need to have some pragmatism here. I think we're happy to commit to talk to you about your specific details, which might not be the same, but well, they won't be the same as another party's. I think the principles that we've talked about of someone who's sufficiently senior to sign this off is the key thing. That won't be the same for every, like the diversity of parties we work with is massive, right? From very large organisations like the one you work with to very small organisations, and there needs to be some proportionality. So I'm happy to speak to you about that.
You just find the right level, the right
answer is.
I think there's no right answer, but I think it's just because irrelevant of why we've got there. I think it's when you get to this stage and you ask for that, it's having it at the right level, isn't it? And having that flexibility to go, well, actually, that is sufficient. What we got was, no, that isn't sufficient. It's got to be your board. So, and that puts us into a process of written resolution and all of the complexities that arise from that. So I think I guess it's a practical application of this process. There's just some teething problems, isn't there?
There's a balance, right? And I'm sure many of you on the call have worked with me in the past. Pragmatism is required. These organisations are definitely, there's a massive diversity, and you know, and I'm not. We'll always consider your feedback. If you think something is impractical, then we will consider whether we think it should change. There is no way, if I said about the service providers, in 10 years' time, if they're performing like this, something's gone wrong. I'm not saying that it's inappropriate for now. Similarly, with our processes, if they were identical in 10 years' time, something's gone wrong. Like, we need to flex and adapt. So I'm happy to consider that challenge, and we will consider if that guidance is, what's the way to say it? We'll look at it and see if there can be a better wording around that. I think we need to go into a bit of detail to decide whether or not it would change, but I'm happy to deal with you. I'm sorry, that was the wrong phrase, isn't it? Happy to deal with it. That's awful. I'm happy to deal with this issue with you.
No, that's fine. It's a good test case, isn't it? Yeah.
In a one-to-one, because I don't think it affects everybody. And clearly, if it is something that needed to change, that then would be rolled out to everybody.
Thanks, Anton.
I have slightly lost my flow. I think this was the last slide on service providers. I am happy to take questions that are relevant to those sections. I did invite that one from Steve, didn't I? I think that might be more of a natural question for the open forum. But if there are any bits on either what we're seeing across the market or what we're seeing, particularly about service providers, I think now might be a good time to discuss that. Well, I think I'll hand over to my colleagues, Lewis and Andrew, who'll take you into the next section.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Lewis. I'm a member of the analytics team within the performance assurance side, and I'll be taking you through the next few sections of this deck. So to start with, we're going to do a quick recap on dashboards. This section's me quite light because obviously we held dedicated webinars pre-Christmas, and the links to those are included in this slide if you want to go back to look through them. Also, a quick note on questions about dashboards. If you have questions about something very specific to your party, for example, why is my score in this risk driver X? This is probably not the best forum for it because obviously we've got to be conscious of confidentiality and we don't want to share people's performance on this sort of forum. So if you do have a very specific question, please get in touch with us directly via the mailbox. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so as a quick recap, so all 3 versions of the performance assurance dashboard are now live on the REC portal. These dashboards are fundamental to our performance assurance approach. They're our main method of providing visibility on market and party performance. And they allow for you to independently review performance and identify areas of improvement. Just to reiterate, it is important that you review these dashboards on a periodic basis and take appropriate action to improve performance in low performing areas. And this will then reduce the likelihood of PATs being applied to you in the future. So to quickly recap on the 3 different versions of the dashboard available. So you've got the REC party dashboard. So obviously available to REC parties. This shows performance across various aspects of the REC, from how you perform against the risks defined in the retail risk register to things such as energy theft and SMIS survey results. In this dashboard, in some tabs, you will only be able to see data for yourself. In others, you'll be able to see your own data plus anonymized data for other parties in the market. And the next dashboard we have is the service provider dashboard, which is only applicable to REC service providers. It shows monthly performance against defined SLAs, and service providers will only be able to see their own data. And finally, we have the public dashboard. So this is available to all REC portal users. The only tab currently available on there is the peer comparison, and all data displayed on this dashboard is currently anonymized. Over time, we will look to, there's thought as to whether what additional pieces of analysis we bring into this public dashboard, and whether over time we make it unanonymized, so we bring through real party names, but that's one for the long term. Okay, so
Lewis, just before you move on, sorry,
yep.
Just jump in quickly. Two quick points, maybe to forestall a question or two. So there is actually a fourth dashboard that is just worth mentioning, that nobody on this call, unless there are any PAB members that have also dialed in, will have access to, which is the PAB dashboard, which effectively gives them access to the same information, but as obviously PAB users, they can, PAB members can see performance across the market. So just to mention that for information purposes. And then the other quick thing just to mention is, if there are some service providers on the call, we're aware there was an issue accessing data within the service provider dashboard. That should now have been resolved. We're just doing some final checks on that, but you should now be able to go in and see that data. So for those who raised that, thanks for bearing with there. Just a little bit of a handshake issue that needed to be resolved. So just 2 quick points to add that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we're good to move on to the next slide. So now just a quick recap on access. So each of the dashboards is accessed slightly differently. So the party dashboard, you access through the party operations section of the portal via the performance assurance tab. And you can see there's, as highlighted in red there, there's a dashboard option, the PA dashboard option that you click on. So in order to view this dashboard, you require a certain role to be defined, which is a REC performance assurance dashboard viewer. So this can either be granted by the contract manager, the MAU, or someone in the portal team. However, we're aware of a few issues there with the MAU and the contract manager being able to assign this permission for some organisations, and obviously that is being looked into. Email communications were issued to parties at the point the dashboards went live, confirming the portal organisation page each party's dashboard will be published to, as there are some organisations on this call who have multiple different pages, multiple different entities that they can go on and view for. We issued comms to confirm which one of those the dashboard would be visible to. And if you are one of those parties who has multiple organisation pages on the portal, if you try to access the dashboard through a page other than that was communicated, you will not be able to view any of your organisation's data. Okay, so on to the next one, which is on accessing service provider at the service provider dashboard. So the way you'd access this is very similar. So same page, it's just a different option. So important thing to note here is if your organisation is not a rec service provider, you will not see this option, so you don't need to worry about this. As I've logged in on these screenshots here, I have both options. In order to view this dashboard, you need a slightly different, although similarly named permission called the Rec Service Provider Dashboard Viewer. The means of getting that role granted are exactly the same as just mentioned. And yeah, as Andrew noted, the access issue should now have been resolved. Okay, so next slide, please. So the public dashboard. So this can be accessed by any Rec Portal user. You don't even need to log in. It's just access on the main My Dashboard page under the Rec Information section. There's a button that says Public Dashboard. So very easy. Okay, on the next slide, please. And then, as I mentioned before, we held dedicated webinars to dashboards pre-Christmas. So the links are just attached here. So when the slides go out, if you would like to review or view any of these sessions, if you weren't already present on them, the links are there ready for you. There is also a user guide on accessing the dashboard, including information about what's available on there and the basic functions of the dashboard, like filtering, drill downs and that sort of thing. As I mentioned, if you've got any specific issues or you have any suggestions for future improvement, please contact us directly on the Performance Assurance mailbox. We're looking to continually develop the dashboard over time, so any feedback is welcome. Okay. So have any questions on dashboarding come through? Okay, so Ed, I see you've got a hand up.
Yeah, hi there. Thanks for talking us through it. I've got a few quick questions. It's fine if you want to redirect me to the mailbox. My first question would be, what's the update cycle for the data on the dashboard? Looking at mine now, I've got it on a second screen. The latest data I can see is September 2022.
So it should be October at this stage.
It says October, but when you open up the filter to select for the latest data available, data.
I can pick that one up if you like, Lewis. Sorry, Ed, I think we just lost your connection there for a second. So in the drop downs, it will say latest month, which at the moment would be October.
Right.
Then it'll have September, August, and I'll stop trying to count months backwards in my head. But essentially we'll drop down. So the current month is always labelled as latest month. It's a technical restriction on allowing some of the reset filters to work if you're interested in getting into the Power BI design. The date is also on the top of the page, as I think you mentioned, you'll see there. So the data you'll be looking at when you first land on it, or if you do a reset filters using the button there, will always be the latest month. And right now, that latest month will be October. And that's aligned to the data collection cycle and then the PAB publication cycle. So just to explain that for everybody. So for example, in December, we parties data that's provided to us is for the October performance month, so it gives you that kind of month and a day essentially of time to collect and validate and review data that's submitted to us. And then we publish that at the point at which PAB papers are published, which is the, if I get this right, the last but one Tuesday in a month. So PAB's always on the last Tuesday of the month, PAB papers are a week before that, and that's when the updated data is then released out. So in a week or so's time, there'll be a refresh, and that will then have the data through November, which includes data that was submitted by parties, earlier in January. If you sort of follow the cycle, I sometimes feel I need to draw it on my wall, but I hope that helps clarify. But yeah, the one thing to watch is the current month in the filter is labelled as latest month rather than its actual name. And unfortunately, that's kind of a necessary evil in terms of allowing some of the other functionality to work. But it tells you the actual month on the top, like kind of menu bar, which obviously you kind of mentioned you could see.
Yeah, that makes sense. Would it be possible to have something on the dashboard, maybe an extra tab that just makes clear when the next update cycle is for the data?
Yeah, there's something we've been exploring. So as I mentioned, we're obviously kind of constantly thinking about what improvements can be made, and this is obviously kind of 1.0 if you like. One thing that's been sort of on a list of options is effectively to almost have like a front page to the tabs that's almost a sort of a release notes page, for want of a better term. So it would allow us to do a couple of things. This is the latest data, this is when it was published, and then also if and we've seen this occasionally over time historically with data, if we've had to, for example, withhold a particular metric because of a data issue, but we've published everything else, we could then kind of have those notes there, and it's just kind of, it's to hand when you're looking at the dashboard, because we can put it in the newsletter or something, but you come and look at the dashboard a week later and it wouldn't be there. So that's the sort of thing we're thinking about. Obviously all these things go through a kind of change cycle and so forth, but that's kind of helpful feedback to add to the list.
Cool, thanks. I'm not sure if it's me that's a bit of a lost connection here, but you were a bit breaky up there, but I got the gist of what you were saying.
Cool.
My other question really is around thresholds and fail criteria. So I noticed that on the retail risk register, the downloadable version, all criteria are still slated as TBC. Yet on the dashboard, there's clearly some sort of criteria going on.
Yeah.
So is it possible to obtain the details of what a minor, major fails look like, what the criteria are for each of the elements that are going in there, and potentially also a timeline for when you intend to fold in the rest of the risk registers on there, so that we can sort of keep in step with you guys to be able to focus on the things that you are as well.
It's a good question. I'll cover some of it. I might ask for comment from one of my colleagues on specifically on the on the risk register document, just in the timing on that. But just to explain the criteria, so the minor, major, and we have the option of fail. There's actually nothing with a fail defined at this stage, so you'll never see a fail at the moment, but the kind of capability is there. Those are defined for all items, and there's a current risk register review happening. Like literally sort of, I mean, not literally now, because most of the people doing it are probably on the call with me, but that work is happening, kind of this month. So I think there'll be an updated risk register document published fairly shortly, and Via or Anton, if you want to come in and just clarify the exact timing, if you know on that, then please feel free to do so. The other aspect of that, now that is minors and majors, so that's how the scoring works, and I can give you kind of a quick overview of that, and we can point to some other resources that provide a bit more detail. But essentially, every risk has a minor and some have a major defined, and essentially it's a sort of level of non-compliance score, and then that contributes to the normalized score. So works a bit like doing a driving test, although I think driving test instructors are on strike for like 6 weeks, so maybe that's not the best analogy to use anymore. But a sort of minor gets you a sort of 1, and a major gets you a score of 5, and then we normalize it based on the number of events that occur to try and be able to obviously compare between different things. That feeds into, but is distinct from, a threshold, which is something that the PAB then set, and a threshold comprises of 3 measures. So one is a score measure, so using those minor and major scores, what's the level of performance over which the PAB would look for intervention or activity to occur. But also within that threshold, we have the concept of a trend period. So essentially, does that have to be above that score just for 1 month, or is it over a series of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, for example? And that varies for different measures. Obviously some are more time sensitive than others. And then the third element that's also built into the threshold definitions is the level of overall, what we call the minimum activity level. So it's effectively the amount of, for example, switches, if it was a switch related metric that you were doing, the idea there being that you might have a score of, say, 0.5, but actually it's because you've had 2 switches and one of them there was a problem with, and is that where we want to really be intervening if it's 1 of 2? So the threshold looks at the score, which is driven off the minor and majors, time and overall activity, and the combination of the 3 then effectively allows us to say is a particular party over or under threshold. And the way the performance assurance process is set up, once a party's over threshold, as the code manager, we are essentially obligated to either do something or justify to the PAB why we're not doing something. That something might be an RFI or an RFC, for example, as Vias mentioned. It might be something that isn't party specific. It might be a pan market activity. But that's the way we sort of capture the PAB's policy guidance and intent, if you like, as to where they expect performance to be. So there are minor and major scoring, and then there's thresholds that are related but are sort of separate concepts. I hope that was somewhat followable and understandable, particularly if there's a problem with the line. There is some additional documents that set some of those concepts out, and I think we've done a couple of webinars on it before as well, specifically on some of those topics. So if that's useful, we can share links to all of those things as well. Anton, you popped up on the screen. I didn't know if you wanted to build on that at all.
Yes, just to say, I guess the thresholds as they're set in the dashboard are the reality, but I totally appreciate having a document that's a bit easier to follow as like a reference case is helpful. So we'll definitely check if it's the right version uploaded, and if not, we'll make sure that all the current thresholds are updated in that. This month we were planning on reviewing the risk register to see if anything should be removed or that, but we should do this kind of housekeeping change as it were at the same time. So yeah, thanks for pointing it out.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, your explanation did make sense, and Anton, yes, that made sense on top of it as well. It would be really good to get hold of some form of reference document that allows us to sort of visualize where the minors, majors intersect with the actual thresholds themselves. The previous webinars where you set out the sort of high level context of what this is, the holistic view of how you're going to apply, has all made sense. But I think now that there's actual data on the dashboard and we can start to interact with it and stuff, bringing it to life is just that little bit more tricky, as you can imagine. Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thanks for the feedback, and I think we'll play it in some of the work that's going on the risk register at the moment, but I'm sure it'll be an evolving picture. We obviously spent some time coming up with the design, and it took some time for us to get a picture in our mind and then take others through that picture. So no doubt it will take some time to get everybody to that same level as well. But we'll keep working on that, and obviously keep letting us know how we're doing. Cool, thanks very much. The only other thing that I wanted to mention, this is just some general feedback I've had from other users of the dashboard. It's quite difficult if you're not very well embedded in the world of what REC does to actually follow the risk. And what I mean by that is, we've got risk register or risk driver registers plastered all over the place, numbers like 5.2, 8.7, etc. And there's a brief description when you click on each one. Is it possible to start folding in links within this dashboard so that you can quite easily, you can see your risk on there, you can click a link on it and it will take you to somewhere that's going to describe that risk, or you'll click on it and it will take you to the relevant, perhaps a section within the relevant schedule, so that you can more easily identify something and then track it through to what it means, rather than have to trawl through all the information that's available in Rec to find the specific thing that you're after.
I like the suggestion. I don't know technically how easy or hard it is to implement that, but I like the suggestion. And so again, let's capture that one for the improvement register, and I'll take that one away and have a chat with some of the developers and see what the art of the possible looks like.
Sounds good. It's just, as I say, as we're now getting more people to interact with it,
yeah,
little
exactly.
things like this are what sort of
and
being
some people
fed
look at it once a day, some people look at it once a week, some people look at it, you know, once a month or less than that, right? So you've got to try and cater for all of those different kind of familiarities, as you absolutely call out. So
cool. Well, that was it for me for now. So
great. No, thanks
very much.
No, thanks for jumping in. I'm just going to.
We have had quite a few questions come in via Slido. If you want to take those now.
But by all means, let's knock off a couple of quick ones. Somebody said please share the links. I assume that's to the webinars. Yeah, I think the pack's going out after the call, so the links will be in that. So that's hopefully quite an easy one to cover. So explanation of the risks, or is there any documents available for us to use? There's a question about documentation. So yes, there are a few documents, and maybe what we'll do before we send the slide pack out actually is maybe we'll add another slide with some other links on. But there's as Lewis mentioned, there's a user guide for the dashboard, that's very much about the mechanics. So that's, you know, how do I get to it? How do the buttons work? What do some of these things mean? Like, how do I navigate? So it's very much that kind of documentation. And then there are also various documents on the portal around things like the risk register that we've just been talking about, for example, that's, I guess, more about the underlying risks and so forth that we're measuring through the activity in the dashboard. So maybe we'll either add to this slide or add an extra slide in before we share the pack, and just kind of point people to all of those various resources that are available and that are out there. I think there's also some content on the wiki, which is also in the portal. So various places you can go to, and also as an individual party, do also talk to your OAM if you're speaking to them. They all have access to the dashboard that you have access to, if you see what I mean. So they're able to sort of go through that with you as well, and we'll be able to hopefully answer at least some of the questions, and obviously can pull in other team members as needed depending on the specific detail. Third question on the list here on service provider performance, a concern around the potential disconnect between the CSS registration and the CDSP registration. I also saw there was some chat going back and forth in the actual Teams chat on what I think was a similar question. Anton, I don't know, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I hope I've addressed it in the chat, but I'm happy, like sometimes that's not the most transparent way to do things. So I'm aware of the way that I'd say this sounds like an issue that I know about, that we have discussed at the RecPab, and I believe at the UNC PAFA, although don't attend that meeting, a little bit reticent to talk about it in full detail because it could be a different issue, couldn't it? It could be a different issue. So I don't want to gloss over that. So I think what I'd like to do is check that it's the same issue, but there is an issue that sounds very much like this one that's been discussed at those two forums. The risk has been identified, acknowledged. The service provider has a plan in place to address this. I believe it relates to missing messages that then didn't get updated in CDSP. And that plan involves both fixing the problem forward, but also addressing the data drift between the two systems. That is subject to oversight by the PAB. So I think the key action for me here is making sure that I'm talking about the right thing, probably not in this meeting, but that it is that issue, because if there's another issue, then clearly my update isn't accurate. But on that basis, I guess the key message is, yes, this is something on the PAB's agenda. Yes, this is something that's monitored. Yes, the service provider has a plan to address it. We think if that plan is completed in the right way, that could resolve this issue. I don't believe that has happened yet, but that's the current position. This is one of the thing that I'm aware of is one of the issues that's talked about at the Switching Operator Issues Forum, So there is opportunity to get a weekly update on progress, ask questions at that forum if that is something that those on the call want to do.
Thanks, Anton. I'm going to keep going through the questions. That's just a new one's been added, but I'll keep dropping through the ones that were there originally, and I'll come back to the new one in a second. So hopefully that answered that one. Question around setting up the dashboard viewer permission. So if you're an organisation where your MAU access is working okay, as mentioned, there's a challenge with some users, then the master admin user is able to allocate roles to other users. I don't have that privilege myself. I'm not our master admin user, so I can't screen share and show you how to do it, but it's within the settings part of the portal. If you're having any problems with that, easiest thing to do is just drop a quick line to the inquiries, so the help desk emails, that's inquiries@recmanager.co.uk, and they will either be able to jump on a call and take you through how to do that, or do that on your behalf with the appropriate authorization, particularly if you're an organisation that's currently suffering with this MAU defect. So that's how that's assigned. There's a question saying, why did the format change for the file uploads? I'm going to struggle to answer that one slightly because I'm not sure exactly what that's referring to. I have a feeling it might be, and if it is, then we're going to come to this in a second. This might be a question about file validation, which we're going to come on to in the webinar. Ed, I just saw a hand go up and down. Was that indicating that you were asking that question? Sorry.
No, I was going to say I asked that question a week or two ago, and it was a tightening up of the case-specific validation rules around data fields, capital letters, lower letters, spaces, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So what's actually changed here is that the portal historically did not validate files uploaded to it. The validation was a sort of ex post validation. One of the kind of continuous improvement activities was to add file validation to the portal, and that's now largely gone live. I'm going to talk about that in a second, actually. And obviously the benefit of that is a more immediate piece of feedback, and sort of a higher quality data coming in. That is currently case sensitive. We have raised the question as to there may be cases where case sensitivity is not required, and therefore can that be kind of dialed back, and sort of we're not over validating, shall we say. Obviously that needs to go through again a sort of change process. So again, that's something that's on the radar. We want to get the right level of validation in play here. So that's if that answers that question, then hopefully that covers that. We've then got two new questions. But I've got three new questions. So what is the EFR process? We have an EFR that we raised under Alexa, but now it's under REC and it's ready to close. Who's responsible for those at REC? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know whether any of my colleagues can help with that one. If not, we might have to take that one away.
Apologies. Are you reading Slido? Because
I am reading Slido. Sorry if you know.
Yeah. Could.
So the question is, what is the EFR process? ? We have an EFR that was raised under Alexon, but now it's under REC and is ready to close. Who is responsible for those at REC?
I think I understand this. So you come to these calls, you get a lot of difficult questions. I'm going to set out some assumptions. If whoever it is, just correct me if I've got it wrong. So I think we are talking about a metering organisation who was subject to assurance under the BSC and had some findings raised. I think EFR, I forget the right term, is the findings closeout process. I think just reach out to us. The general principle here is that findings from the BSC kind of still apply and should be closed, but the BSC no longer is responsible for these types of metering activities. So you close them with us. There shouldn't really be any different. Okay, so you've got different different teams, but we've got full access to all of the information and, well, all of the final conclusions and action plans that the BSC concluded with their latest round of assurance. So I think that's, I'm hoping that's the right answer. I know there's someone on the call who asked the question. If there's further probing required or I haven't quite hit the nail on the head, please ask.
I've not seen a hand go up, so I'll consider that done for now. If the person wants to come back or wants to come back offline, then please do so. So I think we've got two left, because I think the format changed one. I think we covered off whoever's ticking the questions off on Slido as I'm answering them. Sometimes there are delays in the REC responding to reports loaded email queries. Is there any reason behind this that causes future reports? I'm assuming this is asking around the scenario where you're having a file validation problem, essentially. Those all go into the help desk, so they are subject to the help desk's sort of standard SLA timescales. Obviously, those queries can sometimes be a bit peaky, so obviously most people are uploading data around the same time, so they should be responded to within the SLA. And obviously, if they're not, then you know that goes into the service provider reporting that was mentioned before. So we do try and get through those. We're also going to touch in a second on file validation, actually, and a bit of kind of common things we're now starting to see, and we'll continue to kind of maintain that sort of FAQ type view. So hopefully over time, you know, kind of become more familiar with that anyway. I hope that answers that one. And then a final one on validating files. Surely we want to go down the route of a data flow with an appropriate medium rather than a CSV upload. So I think that's sort of saying, you know, should we be using different forms of data being submitted to us? So, you know, whether that's some form of API or, you know, an XML file flow, or you know, should we be kind of going for a DFlow type model? I think there's a balance here with it goes back to, I think, probably a point, Anton, you made earlier on, actually, which is the real kind of variety of scale size of parties, and hence trying to find the right technical solution across all. There is an underlying objective across the REC, across all the REC services, of increasing data and digitization. And again, to steal Anton's words from before, if in 5 or 10 years' time we're still having files uploaded by this, is that the right answer? Probably not. I think, you know, the approach we've taken to date has been to build on what existed in kind of pre-REC world, and try to sort of go for something that is perhaps you know, offers some degree of flexibility and you know, kind of for different scales of organizations. If there is, you know, kind of strong views out there that a good chunk of parties would find it materially easier to work with a different form and structure of data, and that would, you know, for example, as I say, some form of flow-based or API-based method, we'd certainly be up for those conversations. But obviously we sort of weigh that up against it becoming a barrier for other organisations in terms of technical requirements. So we're just trying to get that balance right. So I hope that makes sense. I'm conscious. I think I just saw a hand flick up. Sorry. Let me just go really quickly to that. I don't know. There was something in the chat.
I'm just wondering, would it make sense? We do have, like, we're doing an open forum now, and it's great, actually. Like, the whole reason we've set up a meeting is to engage with you, and that's literally what's happening now. But it might make sense for us to go through, I think it's the file validation section next, and make sure we've done our bits, and then take the open forum at the end. Now, if someone, like in the file validation section, if you've got a question about file validation, it'll make more sense if we answer it there. Right? That'll have a better flow. So please keep asking questions, but yeah.
And I can just to say really quickly, Anton, on that, and then Lewis, I'll pass back to you for file validation. So I'm seeing a couple of questions in the chat on file validation. We might try and pick those up a little bit as we go through, but again, equally just I think, as you say, on time. If we time out on some of these, then we'll pick up directly if we make a note before we drop off the call of the individuals who've raised these specific points, and we'll sort of seek to come back to you, you know, kind of directly on the particular issues that you're raising there. So, Lewis, final addition.
Yeah,
which we've
sure.
probably covered about half of already in some of the questions,
Yeah,
which
I
is
think
fine.
so. And yeah, hopefully we'll answer some of the pending questions as well. So, okay, if we go to the first slide, please. Okay, so as a quick overview, so as explained already, I was going through this quite quickly. So automatic validation of files uploaded to the performance assurance areas of the portal have been phased in over the past couple of months. It allows for files to be validated in real time by the portal against the schemas defined in the performance assurance report catalog. So the performance assurance report catalog is what you should be aiming for and what you should use as your reference. So it has two main benefits. So it provides instant feedback, reducing the need for back and forth communication, and it allows for an automated process to be put in place so we can be more efficient overall. So I think the main efficiency drive is that with this validation, we will get through standard data files. That's the idea from everyone. Therefore, we spend a lot less time manually validating files, dealing with issues on our side. At present, this validation is in place for nearly all the party data items, the main exceptions being the theft outcome files and the two new switching data or updated switching data items, both of which I'm going to touch on a bit more detail. And I think there was a question through I saw about the new updated switching data items, so I'll get to that later on. Okay. So what types of validation are there in place at the minute? So there are 6 main types of validation. So firstly, we're looking, is the file type valid? So if in the report catalog it's specified that the file either has to be a CSV file or a text file, for example, is the file being uploaded actually a CSV or text file? And is that file in a standard encoding format for that file type? Are the delimiters in the file correct? So if it's a CSV, so CSV by nature means it should be comma separated. Are the column delimiters actually commas in that file? And then we perform validation on the header, on the file header row. So here, for example, validation looks, has the row been provided? Have field headers been provided? Do the field header names exactly match that in the report catalog? I think as someone mentioned, I think Ed mentioned earlier around case sensitivity. Yeah, file validation is case sensitive on the field headers, so they need to exactly match what's in the report catalog in order for the file to be accepted. Are the fields in the same order? Are there any extra or missing fields, that sort of thing? So this piece of validation is relevant for everything except from the theft outcome files, which I'll touch on more on the next slide, I think. And then we do validation on the data itself. So the first 3 I've just talked about were more about the structure of the file. There's separate steps looking at the data within the file itself. So as you'd expect, we look, is the data provided in the correct formats? So our dates in the correct date format, are numeric fields actually numeric? The next one is, have mandatory fields been populated? If mandatory fields defined, they're not allowed to be left blank. So validation searches those fields to see whether there are any blank entries in there. And then lastly, if valid values are specified for a given column, have only those valid values been provided? So the validation will check, is there a value in that column that is not in the list of allowed values? Okay, and then next slide, please. So now I'm just going to talk specifically about the theft outcome file validation. So the validation for these theft files are due to go live this month. The same file validation rules will apply with the absence of the header the field header validation as mentioned, because in the theft outcome files, they're structured a bit differently. They have header and trailer blocks instead, and so we will apply validation to those two blocks. As you're probably aware, these files do have quite a complex format, so you may find that your files are rejected at first, because obviously validation is, this automatic validation is very black and white, whereas in our manual processing we're able to deal with some of the slight differences ourselves. But so don't worry if you find your file is rejected at first, we can help you through to get your file to a state that is accepted. We have engaged with multiple parties just take it a step back. As these files are complex, we have already engaged with many parties on this to help resolve their issues. If you do require assistance on getting your theft files into the valid format, please just get in touch with us directly and we're happy to help. Okay, next slide, please. So now we'll just touch on some troubleshooting and some common issues we've seen to date that have come through the mailbox. So there are a couple of different types of error messages that can be received. So the first one is an error message referencing the structure of the file, which would reference row 1 in the error message. These are the most common types of error we've received. They indicate either an error in the field header row or in the overall structure of the file. So to problem solve this issue, some things you can do are check the field names, exactly match that in the report catalog. As mentioned, validation is both space sensitive and case sensitive. Next one is check the fields are provided in exactly the same order as is specified in the report catalog. Check that no additional blank fields have been added to the end of the file accidentally. And also check that the file is in a standard encoding format, which is UTF-8 or ANSI. We've seen instances where files provided in less common formats like UTF-BOM have been rejected. So below that screenshot there is an example of one of the structure of the file row 1 error messages that you may receive. Okay, next slide, please. The second type of error message that you could receive is one referencing the file content being incorrect. So within this, the row reference will be anything after row 1 typically. So for example here, row 8. So this is effectively an issue with the data itself rather than the structure of the file. So this could be something like a mandatory field being left blank or a date field provided in a incorrect date format. So in that case, they're probably easier issues to spot because it should be quite clear from reviewing the report catalog what the issue there is. Many of the issues we see are the result of data being collated in Microsoft Excel or a similar tool before being converted to CSV or text file formats. Because unhelpfully, in this instance, Microsoft Excel does a certain amount of auto formatting. So one of the common issues we've seen is files being sent to us in CSV format where the MPAN, for example, has been converted to a scientific number format. Therefore, obviously, we're unable to process it. So it's not it comes through to us as, I don't know, for example, 1.8 times 10 to the 12 or something like that, which obviously we cannot use or relate in our analysis. So the top tip is to basically please re-review your file if you're following this method of first collating data in Excel before converting, just to make sure none of this auto formatting has flowed through. As I mentioned, if you completed any troubleshooting steps or you're really unsure of why your file is being rejected, if you contact us directly, we can help you out. Okay, so I think just check. I think that's the last slide. Yep, that was the last slide on file validation. As this next section is quite quick, I will just speed through it and then we can come to questions afterwards. So just a quick note on upcoming activity. So I think to start, there are a few change proposals, some of which have already been mentioned that we're working through at the moment and looking to submit. So first one is relating to the performance assurance report catalogue. So we are making minor corrections to the RGMA flow related data items following feedback from parties. So thank you very much to those parties who provided us with feedback there. We will also be removing the switching data items 1430 and 1440 as they are now going to be replaced by the 1431 and 1441 data items. So the 1431 and 1441 data items were introduced in the report catalogue, I believe, back in June 2022, and we communicated at the time that we would allow a transition period before switching from the original 1430 and 1440 files to these new, slightly different files. I think we allowed a 6-month transition period initially, which is now elapsed, so we are going to be phasing these out. We will also be updating the 1810 data cleanse exemption report schema to allow for the new exemption scenarios that have been added since we first took over the data cleanse reporting process. And then the final one to mention is it does relate to the report catalogue. So obviously we mentioned we are conducting a risk register review at the moment. If it is found through that we need to introduce any new risks that require more data, that we will need to issue a further report catalogue change proposal to allow for us to capture that data in the report catalogue. The next change proposal we're working on is all around the data cleanse reporting. So this was all of these suggestions, all of these changes here relating to data cleanse reporting have come out of discussions at the REC issues group, or the RIG. So firstly, we're looking to formally bring the data cleanse guidance documents into the REC change process, so moving them to a category 3 document. We are going to re-add the movement summary report, which was previously produced under the Ofgem switching group back into the reporting pack, and we will be looking to separate the no meter MTC report into 2 sub-reports. I believe there may also be one other change we're going to encapsulate there, which we're going to discuss at tomorrow's REC issues group. And then finally, we're raising a change proposal on the energy theft schedule. So this is mainly to clarify the schedule and improve the visibility around the operation of the scheme. So this includes things like clarifying reporting requirements and timelines, clarifying the process around determining theft targets, and the treatment of solar events, and the calculation of the debit and credit amounts of the scheme year. It will also include removal of the transition language, which is obviously no longer relevant, and a note on treatment of targets of less than 1. Okay, and then the next slide, we'll just quickly cover on upcoming key dates or deadlines. So energy theft. So we will be issuing the 2023-24 scheme year targets by the 1st of March 23. They will be directly communicated to by each party via email. The final theft outcome file submission for this current scheme year will be the 2nd of May 2023. Any files issued after that date may not be included, so please make every effort to comply with that requirement. And then the final debit and credit values for the current scheme year will be communicated by the 22nd of August. And then just a reminder on data submission. So performance assurance data submission is required by the 1st working day of the month. Service provider data provision is required by the 5th working day of the month. Just please make every effort to continue to do this. We're aware that in these early months of file validation, there may be delays there if you need to make any edits to files, but yeah, we're still applying those deadlines. And finally, maintenance and qualification. So the requirements and deadlines were communicated via email this week. The deadlines are specific to parties, hence they were communicated individually. The requirements and deadlines for 2022 were communicated back in November 2021. And please make sure that if you are unsure whether you have any outstanding maintenance and qualification submissions for the previous year, please get in touch with us just to make sure.
There's just a jump in because I'm not sure if you'll have seen it. I saw a hand go up from Helen. Helen, do you want to jump in?
Hi there. Sorry, who sent the 2023 submission requirements? Because I don't think I've seen that.
Oh, the MOQ, is that specifically? Sorry.
Yeah, that's the one.
I'm going to ask Via or Anton to jump in on that one if that's okay, because I think that'll be a better place.
So I think it's my turn to answer. So our maintenance team actually aren't on the call, but if I just, I'll do two things. Firstly, check. I can only see your name. I can't see your organisation. Check that your organisation has been contacted, but check more broadly. I see Angie also. Haven't seen that either, so I'll double check that. And I think what we will do, because this is quite an important one, right?
Well, I'm concerned because I didn't get last year's, so that November 2021 one, I didn't get that one, and then
I'll double check
out
and I'll play back to the entire group.
Yeah, I found out from my rec OSM person that it should have come, and then I got it from her in the end. But yeah, I've not seen this year's one, so I'm concerned that.
Yeah, I'm taking it.
I've missed it.
Like, I don't know if you've missed it, or I don't know if there's a problem on our side, right? And
cheers, thank you.
I think this is a really important one, and I'll check. I'll make sure that we sort yours out, Helen, personally. I will just check your organisation later, but then I think we should play back to everybody what's happened. I think if it's as simple as your contract manager's been sent an email, for example, then that would be the best. I would prefer that's the answer, right? Because that means we've done our bit, right? But if it's that something's been uploaded into the portal for your notification, we'll explain that. So I think this is one that's really important and needs to be played back to everybody after the call.
Yeah, I can see just for visibility, Anton, I can see a couple of other folks have also just popped their hand up and said, yeah, we've not seen it either, and thanks to those who flagged Orcs as well. So I can see Searle on there, Steve, I can see Persephone and Prime Serve as well. So and you'd already picked up NG. So yeah.
Could I just ask
Helen? Need to double check it's not stuck in the Royal Mail strike? And
well, indeed, Helen, maybe it's the tech. Could I just check what your organisation is, because I clearly need to. It's Siemens. Okay. Sorry.
So my email address should be down as the contract manager email address, and I've also got the portal access. So either way, it should have come to me.
Should come through. Yeah.
The whole reason we send that out, right, is to help people feel assured they know when their requirements are. And if you haven't, that's a problem. We need to make sure that you get adequate notice, right? So I'm going to make sure this is sorted.
Yeah, I've had it verbally from my key contact back in December, but yeah, I've received absolutely nothing in writing.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, thanks for flagging it, Helen.
We've had quite a few questions come in via Slido. Would you like to answer those now or wait until the end?
I think
we were just about to move into an open forum. So Katie was just trying to structure it a little bit, because we might not have had many questions, but that doesn't seem to be how it's played out, is it? So I'll just hand over to Lewis. Am I okay to hand over to Katie on your behalf?
Yeah, of course, that's fine.
Hi everyone, so I'm Katie Costa Fernandez. So I work in program assurance and predominantly looking at engagement. So I'm going to try and add a bit of structure, but I know that a lot of you have already submitted some questions, so it might just be a case of handing over to the Slido. But can you proceed on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So yeah, we just want to say it's important that we collect your views. It helps us to develop our work plan. We have suggested some kind of topics to hopefully stimulate and aid discussion, but like I said, you've already been quite forthcoming with your questions, so that's great. So really the kind of three kind of focus areas are any emerging risks or processes that are causing problems, any potential barriers in the way of compliance, or any priority areas of service provider delivery. But I think it might be better Anton, Andrew, if you're happy that we move on to some of the Slido questions.
Well, I think maybe why don't we knock off the questions that are I can see 4 active questions
Okay.
on at the moment
Perfect.
on Slido. So maybe we answer those, and while we do that, that gives people to think about these 3, what I would term bigger picture questions that you've asked there, Katie. Oh, somebody stuck in a 5th question. And obviously with the time available, we can cover those. I suspect we're going to run out of time, which in some ways is a good thing, because I think it's shown that we've got a really engaged conversation, which I hope people have found useful. And I think, Anton, I'm right in saying that this is not a one of one, but a one of many of these sessions going forward, right? So that obviously gives us a steer that yes, these are useful, and obviously we can also think about how much time we allow for discussion versus dissemination. So I'm going to knock through, and some of these I might slightly car park and sort of come back to. So on Slido, first question: I found that there are file validation rules on file submission not included in the PARC, such as file encoding. As far as I'm aware, file encoding is the only thing that's not explicitly mentioned in the PARC. If there are other rules that you think you are seeing that are not in the PARC, could I ask that you just drop those through, the specifics of that on an email? We'll obviously take a look at that. It might be we need to just sharpen up some language in the PARC, or it might be that something's got slightly mixed up between the team that have obviously done the technical development of the validation and the documentation in the PARC. So if you've got specifics, please do shout out on those. We are aware that some further guidance on file encoding would be helpful. We'd already picked up on those. I'm also going to pick up on the next question as part of that response, which is around well, in fact, I should cover the other ones here. So somebody's asked around the corrections on the flow for 660 and 770. So that will come out as a change, because the PARCs are Cat 2. It has to go through a formal change, including an opportunity obviously for everybody to comment and be consulted on. So the purpose of giving the heads up was exactly that. It was a heads up. We're aware this needs to be resolved. It's one of the changes we're going to progress forward. When that CP goes in, which should be fairly soon, I don't have the exact date, that will have obviously all the detail. It will include a red line version of the PARC itself, so you'll literally be able to say exactly what's changed. I'm going to skip over the question in a second, and I will come back to it. But I'm just going to answer the one on the hard to follow that's on the screen. That's right, I hadn't realised it's on the screen here as well. I'm reading off another screen over here. So if there are particular things, again, where you're finding them hard to follow, if I could ask if you just drop us some detail on like the particular areas or examples of feedback, because if we're going to be making a change to the PARC, and there are areas where it would be helpful for us to give more guidance. Obviously, again, that needs to go through a change, so we could roll that into that same change process. So again, if you've got specific feedback on particular items, or in general, we find this thing really kind of doesn't have enough detail, please let us know. Obviously, we want to give you what you need because it helps you, and us helping you helps us as well. So we're all kind of in the same. We've all got the same objective here. Somebody saying, common CSV uploads files break CSV conventions such as spaces and headers in general. I don't want to get into a sort of technical back and forth necessarily on this. I think there is lots of different opinions on exactly what a CSV is, and maybe this gets back to a comment that was raised before on file formats and so forth. That is the specification as they sit today. So that's what we're working to. I'm not sure I can add a great deal more on that, to be honest with you. So that one there.
Do you want to pick the MEM audit one up? Just
do you want to put the MEM one up? Sorry, I'm just reading questions and answering. Yeah.
So actually, because of the legacy of 2 different codes, the MEM audit arrangements are like a little bit complicated. They depend on whether you're electricity and gas. And in fact, there are some other variations that make them slightly different. I think we can make sure that we provide some specific information afterwards. There is an intention for the next financial year, well, from August, from April, for the metering codes to be consolidated, which therefore allow some simplification in this space. So I'll look at making sure appropriate guidance is given. You should have direct. It depends which type of MEM you are, but you should have direct contact with the metering auditor to schedule work when it's needed. Just on the metering specific topic monitoring, the next one down. This is about information relating to a MEM. I know you're using MOP, that's just an old term for the same thing. So if you're a supplier, you may have an embedded MEM and that might be relevant to you, but if you don't, it's not relevant to you. So hopefully that has.
Or I guess Anton, just to a nuance, I guess there. It won't reflect on your performance, your personal performance, is probably the wrong phrase, but you see what I mean, your party performance, but you might be interested to see the performance of some of those processes, because obviously as a supplier, in some cases they affect, you know, you're sort of downstream of those. So, but it's probably of most relevance to MEM parties, which I think is probably the key point. And then more notice of changes to administration to files. It would be helpful to get a bit more detail on what you're referring to there, because so the only change I think we've mentioned is that the validation for theft files is going live. Now, to be clear, it's not changing what's required, it's changing where the checks are performed. So if you were submitting a compliant file yesterday, you'll be submitting a compliant file today. It should not require change. Change in terms of things like the part, for example, is absolutely not a 2 to 3 day notice thing. That goes through the full change process I mentioned before. That can take several months to go through, and then also as part of that consultation may include consulting on an implementation period. So the 1430 to 1431 and 1440 to 1441 would be, I think, probably a good example of that, where the change went through the change process, but as part of that we also identified a need for this transition period, which, as Lewis mentioned, ran for 6 months. So yeah, I'm not expecting people can turn around change in 2 to 3 days, and I would hope we've not tried to create that scenario. If there is any detail, and if you want to contact offline, if it's easier to do that directly, I'm not sure at that time. Okay, so this is on the validation, right? So as I say, because what it is doing is applying the rules as they were in the park. So in that sense, we've not, if we change the format and then put validation on, absolutely there would have needed to be a lot more notice of change. Intention here was to say, you know, this is going live. There was some information shared in the run-up to validation going live over the course of the autumn. It was in various of the bulletins and things, but you know, that may not have caught the eye. There's always a balance in terms of direct communication versus in the bulletin versus specific communication, and that's obviously a balance we're always trying to make. But I think because it's not a change to what's required, we're perhaps just enforcing at a level earlier in the process, and perhaps a little bit more strictly and systemically than has historically been the case. I can appreciate what that might felt like a change to the spec. Certainly wasn't intended to be, but you know, feedback duly noted. I hope that was useful. I'm conscious we're now 2 minutes over time, and that people might be slowly or rapidly dropping away. But I don't know whether we needed to come back to. Actually, I'm not sure who we need to come back to just to wrap up. Is that Amy? Is that?
Yeah, I can absolutely wrap up the session. That's fine. So thank you. Unless anyone has any final thoughts that they'd like to share. No, okay. Well, in that case, thank you to everybody for attending today. We really appreciate you joining us. Just to remind you, I have set up a survey on Slido, so you can give us any feedback that you may have. Please feel free to submit any comments on today's session, or any feedback that you may have that will help us with future events. And yeah, thank you for joining us and have a good day. Speak to you soon.